Hi, welcome to the channel. Today's video is titled From Privates to Colonels, All the British Army Ranks Explained, Napoleonic Wars. Okay, okay. I think there was a particular video that I saw or that I checked that like just highlighted the Napoleonic War, and I said to myself that I was gonna check that, but this yeah, we're going to check this together. It looks quite interesting. We're going to check it together, and I'll love your thoughts and your contribution in the comments below. Let's dive right in.
Picture this, you're a young soldier in the British Army during the Napoleonic Wars. Your daily grind, grueling drills, iron discipline and the looming shadow of battle. It was a hard, unforgiving life, but it was better than many of the other options available to Britain's poorest people. They got paid for a start in the army, not much, but they did get cash in their hand and food in their belly. Most of the time, anyway. Well, in today's video, we'll be looking at how much the men got paid and how much did it vary by regiment. You might be surprised.
Okay.
In this video, we'll also uncover the fascinating rank structure of the British Army, from the raw recruit to the lofty rank of colonel. What ranks were permanent, which ones temporary? And of course, for the fellow military history geeks out there, yep, I'm looking at you, we'll take a butcher's at the insignia of both officers and men. What did all those epaulets and chevrons actually mean? Stick with me, we'll find out. Discover the pay gaps, the power struggles and the surprising opportunities that let some NCOs leap into the officer class. This isn't just history, it's the gritty human story of life in the Napoleonic era army. By the way, talking of which, I'm off to Spain and Portugal soon to visit the battlefields of the Peninsular War. I'll be with my good friend Marcus Cribb, and we'll be walking the ground at places like Rolisa, Vimero, Busaco, Fuentes de Añoro, Salamanca and others. It's going to be brilliant, and you can be part of it. We're looking for sponsors. Donate about $20 and we'll raise a toast to you and thank you on camera in one of the videos. Any money we raise will go towards expenses and it'll be really appreciated. If that sounds good, then please go to ko-fi.com/redcoathistory. That's ko-fi.com/redcoathistory. You can make a donation there and let us know who to thank in the video. Anyway, back to today's film, and Steve Brown, author of all these brilliant books that are on screen now, started off by explaining to me the chain of command amongst the junior ranks.
I'll start at the bottom with the private. I think we all know what private was. Entry-level soldier. A lance corporal was a temporary appointment to acting corporal, but not actually a rank, and the usage did vary between regiments.
Chosen men! So these are private.
Chosen man, which was a term used in various regiments, including the 95th, wasn't actually necessarily the same thing. It could be a permanent arrangement, so that it was actually a license to wear one stripe, so to speak.
And a bit more pay, perhaps?
Wait, temporal appointment to acting corporal, not a rank. Usage varied between regiments. Chosen men was not necessarily the same thing. Was more of chosen men, not necessarily the same thing. So chosen men, lance corporal. Wow.
Actually, no, but I'll get to that.
Okay, fair enough.
It's a bit like the lieutenant. It's a bit like the lieutenant who has to act as a captain, but be paid as a lieutenant.
Sounds like my job.
Applied. Yeah, exactly right. It's very common in the business world. Corporals were middle-ranking NCOs with 2 stripes. They were hopefully sergeants in waiting, and there was typically one of those per 19 privates, which makes up the squad of 20 men, which is the basic building block of battalions. Sergeants were the senior NCO rank in any company until July 1813, when, upon Wellington's recommendation, the rank of colour sergeant was introduced. And
so which one is colour sergeant? Sorry, I had to pause it there, but I was just curious.
Upon Wellington's recommendation, the rank of colour sergeant was introduced, and I'm really talking about infantry regiments here. There's a slightly different arrangement in the cavalry, which I can talk about in a second.
Yeah.
But sergeant was also the most common rank for staff sergeants or staff NCOs, such as the armour sergeant, the pay sergeant, the schoolmaster sergeant, etc., etc. The reason why cavalry regiments are different is that they had troop sergeant majors much earlier than the equivalent rank existed in the infantry. I think by 1813, cavalry regiments had had troop sergeant majors for quite some time, and I think they came into play when they abolished the rank of troop quartermaster. And Wellington particularly pointed out that he wanted colour sergeants to be the equivalent of troop sergeant majors in the infantry battalions. But obviously they felt he couldn't call them sergeant majors because each battalion already had one sergeant major, so they came up with the name of colour sergeant because the idea was a sort of an appeal to the heart, I guess. And amongst everything else, you're expected to look after the colours.
Let me even ask this. I'm saying NCO. What does NCO mean? Please, I don't know. I don't know the meaning, and I'm just curious. I just ask Siri that. But yeah, what does NCO mean? Someone can just please explain it to me if you don't mind, and thank you for doing that. Or Siri, what does NCO mean? Okay,
NCO means
non-commissioned
officer.
officer. Only officers and NCOs were among those listed as. Siri, what does NCO mean? NCO.
NCO is a historical term. It means in the UK National Communications Union.
No, I'm talking Siri. Siri, what does NCO mean?
NCO means non-commissioned officer.
Oh. Only officers and NCOs were among those listed as killed. I still don't understand listed as killed. Thank you, Siri. But yeah, let's go on.
Yep.
And the good old sergeant major, there was one per battalion or one per troop, as I just mentioned in the cavalry, largely responsible for assisting the adjutant in discipline and training. I guess the modern equivalent would be an RSM, or Warrant Officer 1. And sergeant majors wore an officer's uniform, but 4 stripes, and carried the good old paste stick and the crimson sash. And this is apologies for C.F. Franklin for probably taking a bad photograph of what's in his book, but it was too good to not use. This gives you some idea of what the rank stripes at the time looked like, and how they were worn on different arms. Because as you can see, in the battalion company, NCOs only wore ranks on their right arm, and in the flank companies, they wore them on both arms. And in the rifles, they only wore them on one arm, I believe, according to the table. And the light infantry in the Fusiliers. So that
but wait, let me even ask this. Sorry, I had to pause it here. But these are rails, right? They are rails. And are they? There's a color sergeant. They are rails, right? Because I can see the rails, the crown on them. So somebody please explain to me. I want to know. I really want to know, right? So I don't get confused or mix them up, right?
NCOs only wore ranks on their right arm, and in the flank companies, they wore them on both arms.
Okay.
And in the rifles, they only wore them on one arm, I believe, according to the table.
Oh.
And the light infantry in the Fusiliers. So that provides a bit of clarity, perhaps,
Yes.
around what they look like.
We've talked about the NCOs, of course, but what role would they have had within the day-to-day life and the running of the regiment and so on?
On the drill square, a massive amount. Most company officers only really turned out to drill when they had special drill parades. Mostly the training was left to the NCOs and the adjutant, so that they would have been constantly present. The corporals would have been constantly present with their squads. The corporals messed with the men. Usually the sergeants, though, had their own mess. And one of the reasons for that, was because there is evidence that discipline broke down when the sergeants were too close to the men. And in fact, Wellington bemoaned this very fact when the army discipline broke down after the Battle of Vittoria, And he thought that the sergeants were too close to the men in terms of pay scale and familiarity, and then he needed to put a bit of distance between them, which is when he introduced the rank of colour sergeant.
And talking of pay scale, we've got that on screen now. What does this show us,
Yeah,
Steve?
that's just a thing that I stumbled across while I was preparing, but it just shows typical rates of pay, which did actually increase between 1792 and 1829, which is nice to know. In fact, it probably 50% more, or even doubled in some instances. But it also shows the patheticness of the pay scale, because what we are saying here is that a private in the regular line infantry earned all of £9 2 shillings and sixpence a year.
Okay,
Where
£9. Because I was like, I'm trying to do the calculation in my head. Context, right? Yeah.
is a sergeant. What we are saying here is that a private in the regular line infantry earned all of £9 2 shillings and sixpence a year, whereas a sergeant major in the same regiment earned about 3 times as much. So obviously, being a sergeant major is a very desirable thing to get, but there's only one of them for 1,000 men, so you've got to work hard for that. And it also goes to show that if you were going to be either a private or an NCO, the place to aim towards is the Royal Horse Guards, because they do a whole lot better. A private in the Royal Horse Guards earns about 3 times what a private in the line infantry does, and they did pretty well as well. Although you'll see there that the Lifeguards and the Royal Horse Guards only have corporals, but because the Household Cavalry doesn't have any sergeants and never has. The senior NCO rank in the Horse Guards is a corporal.
So why was a private, for example, in the Royal Horse Guards or the Life Guards paid so much more than a private in an infantry regiment? What would have been the justification for that?
That's a very good question, actually. I've never really contemplated that. Certainly, the Lifeguards could afford to be choosy about who they took, and they could be very picky about making sure that they chose a superior class of recruit, whereas the line infantry took more or less anyone that could walk and talk. They were expected to guard the life of the monarch, so they didn't just want anybody in the role, right? They wanted the best that they could get. And therefore, I think the pay scale were tilted towards attracting the best that they could get, or as many as they could get, so they could afford to be particularly choosy, and then train them to death. Because the Castle Cavalry rarely left London; it rarely went on campaign. It was guarding the monarch almost all the time.
I've got this study on screen that you sent me of 76 sergeants who served in the 1st 45th, which you've done a book about, haven't you? The Nottingham.
That's right. Yeah, I did quite a lot of deep drilling on that particular unit, and they were fairly typical units. So these statistics will hold good across the board, I think. But once you reach the rank of sergeant, obviously you had the 3 stripes, and you're feeling pretty good about yourself. But you could be demoted at the drop of a hat for any misdemeanor, because there was pretty much a zero tolerance towards any of that. And of the 76 in the 45th who managed to make it up to sergeant, 70% of them retained the rank for the rest of the career, which is pretty good. But nearly a quarter were demoted once, and about 1 in 12 was demoted twice, but still managed to work their way back up again. And of those that retained their rank, 1 actually went on to be commissioned, 11 went on to become colour sergeant, which, as I mentioned, is the senior NCO in any infantry company. 1 actually deserted, and one of them was actually a disgraced junior officer in another regiment who re-enlisted as a private, and very rapidly worked his way back up to sergeant because he knew the rules.
What a great life story. Did you ever find out more about him?
I tried to do so. The source of the information was from a fairly reliable memoirist, and he described his name, and I was able to find the name of this particular sergeant. But then I tried to relate that name back to officers, and this particular officer was let go in the trenches before Badajoz for cowardice in April 1812. So I looked at the officers who had been let go across in all the regiments that had been present in 1812, and I couldn't find anyone who matched his name, which made me think he re-enlisted under a nom de plume.
That would make sense, I guess, if you're trying to hide from disgrace. One thing I'm surprised about, and you and I have talked about men being commissioned from the ranks before, is that only one was commissioned, because I know it was actually a lot more common than we think in those days. I think Rob Griffith was on once talking about the 5th 60th, and I think he said pretty much every senior sergeant in the 5th 60th ended up being promoted. But that number for the 45th seems fairly low.
Yeah, there was 1 out of 76. I hasten to add that the sergeant major that they took to the peninsula in late 1808, a fellow by the name of Oswald Pilling, who was wounded at Talavera, was also commissioned. So that, there was 2. For some reason, there is another individual who sticks in my mind, but I can't recall the circumstances, who may have been transferred to another regiment, then commissioned. So it was ultimately more than 1.
Yeah.
And it sort of varied by regiment. Far and away, the regiments with the highest percentage of NCOs given commissions was the Foot Guard regiments, but never in the Foot Guards. They were always transferred to other regiments. And that wasn't necessarily class elitism, although there may have been a bit of that going on. But it was simply because that being an officer in the Foot Guards was so expensive, unless you had a huge private income, you almost couldn't sustain yourself. So it was kinder to send them to other regiments.
Yeah, I think I've come across 1 or 2 later on during the sort of Crimean War, I think, who were Scots Guards, and I think they ended up being moved to, like, the School of Musketry and things like that sort of thing.
That tended to happen more in the Victorian era, yes. Entry grade officer rank was either an ensign.
Let me just say this. This is an eye opener as well, because I've never thought of checking this or asking this, but when I saw the title of the video, I got curious, right? And not like even when I see them, I would even recognize or know the difference. I don't, I wouldn't even know the difference, even if I see, like, I wouldn't know. But I mean, it's a good thing to know this, regardless, right? It's still good.
In the infantry, or a cornet in the cavalry.
Let me take it back a bit.
Entry grade officer rank was either an ensign in the infantry or a cornet in the cavalry. More often than not, officers of this rank, and I should add here too that in the Fusilier regiments, they also had second lieutenant, which was an equivalent of an ensign. Ensigns usually, more often than not, only served for a fairly short time in the rank before being promoted to lieutenant, typically 6 months. It was rare, from my observations in looking at hundreds of army lists, that they spent more than about 12 months in the rank. They were always the most junior officer in the company, but they were not allowed to be employed in flank companies. So flank companies had lieutenants and captains, but no ensigns. That was because of the specialist nature of what flank companies, the Grenadiers and the Light Company, did, and it was felt that ensigns were too junior to be on that duty.
Was it almost considered like a training position, essentially, being an ensign?
Oh, very much so. Yeah.
Yeah.
You're coming into the army with, more often than not, no military skill whatsoever.
Makes sense.
And in fact, it was not uncommon to see small troops of small ensigns being marched around the drill square by a 45-year-old sergeant major who was junior to them.
And I'm going a little bit off piste here, Steve, but I just thought it was interesting. Have you come across ensigns maybe being quietly let go when they've not quite lived up to scratch and not being promoted to lieutenant?
A lot.
Really?
Yeah, looking at army lists and the flow of ensigns in and out of a regiment, and it's amazing how many were resigned after only a couple of months in the job, which they were quite free to do. Privates couldn't resign at any time, but officers could. So those who felt that the army wasn't quite all they thought it was going to be, didn't last very long, which is probably just as well, because you wouldn't want them anyway.
Yeah, I suspect many were encouraged to resign, but that would just be speculation.
It would be informed speculation, I would think.
Brilliant. Anyway, so sorry, we should move on to lieutenant, Steve.
Lieutenants are middle-ranking company grade officers. They were kind of the workhorse of the company, I guess. There was a couple of those for each company. Technically they were captains in waiting, but a lieutenant without Opportunities, influence, or the ability to purchase could be in the role for quite a time, which was unfortunate, but that did happen. Commanders of companies or troops were always captains, and this was the lowest rank that had eligibility to be promoted by brevet, which is a communal uplift of an entire class of officers to the next rank in the army, so that an officer could be a captain and brevet major. So as far as the regiment was concerned, he was a captain, but as far as the army was concerned, he was a major. But again, it's one of those things, he's paid as a captain, but could be asked to do duty as a major. This theme keeps recurring. Major was usually the second in command of a battalion or commander of part of a battalion, i.e. a wing. It was not uncommon for lieutenant colonels to split the regiments up on campaign or on the battlefield into wings. And of course, the major was also there to command the battalion if the lieutenant colonel goes down or is not present. And you'll be surprised at how many majors were commanding battalions at a lot of Wellington's major actions, quite a few.
Yeah.
A lieutenant colonel was normally the substantive commander of a battalion in the infantry or the regiment within the cavalry, and it was the highest possible regimental rank. You then get to the lofty heights of colonel, which was not a regimental rank. Officers or lieutenant colonels were promoted to this rank by brevet or by special merit. And colonels were seen as being generals in waiting, and they were often seconded to staff rather than regimental duties. They could also be appointed to brigadier general, which was at the time not a rank. It was a title, and it was a temporary, and it was only for the duration. So a colonel or even a lieutenant colonel could be a brigadier general on a specific campaign, but the minute they leave the theatre of war, they're back to being a lieutenant colonel again.
Yeah.
And again, apologies to C.F. Franklin, but this was by far and away the best image I could find of all the various rank designators within the officer corps. Lieutenants and ensigns only had the single epaulet, which was usually on the right shoulder. Captains also, it was obviously very hard to tell ensigns, lieutenants, and captains apart.
Yeah.
But that's the way it was. The field officers had typically two epaulets. With a slight variance in the actual pip, if you like. Although they weren't actually pips at the time, they were either, I think, Star of the Garter or the Crown, to help you designate which brand of officer you were referring to. So that was your typical designation for the various officer classes.
I think modern pips are probably a bit easier to decipher. I'm sort of looking at this a tiny bit lost.
The adjutant is perhaps a little bit easier to pick up because he's got the single flap on the left shoulder, in addition to the epaulet on the right, but ensign, lieutenant, and captain are all the same.
Makes sense to you? Good, because I got a bit lost. Steve, friend of the show, will be back again soon. And I'll be back next week, of course, with another slice of British military history. I'll see you then.
Thank you. Thank you. This is an eye opener and learning for me, because not like when I see any of them, I'll remember this, but at least this is just have an idea of what it is, right? So you don't get lost, right? But makes total sense. Makes total sense. If you're a British Army or whatever the case may be, you can also share, or if you have a bit of idea, you can also share for us to learn. I love learning, right? And stuff like this excites me to learn, so that when I see, I can be able to pinpoint to say, oh, this is exactly what um I saw in the video. So now I know, and I have an idea, so I don't get lost and whatever. You get what I mean? But still, I just think this was an eye opener still, and great learning knowledge. But let me know what your thoughts are in the comments below. Make sure to like, comment, share, subscribe, and all that stuff. And until next time, see you in the next video.